Ladies and gentlemen, it is 7:30, actually 7:34 in Dallas, Texas, which means it's time for cinematic conversations. And today we're really, really lucky to have Peter Simic. Peter, Peter is kind of an anomaly. He's an incredibly great writer. Many of you read him in D Magazine, and he writes about all kinds of issues. And every time he writes about film, it's just really good. The way that he sees and thinks about film is very powerful and very strong. And, unfortunately, he has a lot of other things that he has to write about, and he doesn't get to do it nearly as often as we in the film world would like, because there aren't very many good film critics in this area that are still working and writing. And so there's something really kind of lost. So it was very important for me as we start to, as we build out this series, um, to um, to have Peter. And before Peter, we get to tonight's film. If you want, I'd really be curious, because you do have very good taste in film. You like esoteric films. You think about them. How did you start to get interested in film and have something more than just sort of a passing curiosity? Because clearly you think about these things.
I don't, that's a good question. I mean, it just strictly chronologically, I grew up around movies and I think when it became something that was more than just sort of entertainment and more something that it's like something you sort of engage with in a more direct or, attentive way is in high school. There was it was like a proto Netflix thing called, so I grew up in New York, but I grew up on Long Island. And the part of Long Island I grew up on was like a movie wasteland. So if you wanted to see good theater, good movies, you had to go into the city or had to go to the North Shore of Long Island. And back in the day, Blockbuster Video, however had their algorithms of the time, whatever they figured out for the town I lived in Long Island, our Blockbuster was abysmal. They had nothing, and it was like four walls of everything that came out over the last 3 months, and that was it. And so once I had my family had sort of worked through the one shelf of foreign films, my dad found this thing called Home Video Festival, and I'd never really seen it. I've never researched what it was, but this was probably in the early 90s, and he started. This was our only way to get movies. It was sort of like a Netflix service, but with VHS. And so, and this is a reflection of his brain. The way he approached it was, okay, we're going to get all the Scorsese's, we're going to get all these Hitchcock films, and we just sort of worked through. So beginning in like junior high through high school, it was like a real um, conscious working through all these sort of great films. And I don't know what clicked or what made him particularly, I think the thing I've been thinking of in recent years is a lot, and this might come up weird because of one of his later films that I loved back in high school, The Year of Living Dangerously. I think there was a certain amount of, did I love the movies or did I want to live in the movies? And I think that was always sort of my cinephile tension. That like, did I, and so I would always seek out these sort of films there that had this sort of a character that was easy to sort of transpose yourself in, and Weir's work in that way. I think Picnic and Hanging Rock works in that way, and we can talk about that too, because there's a movie I saw in high school and haven't seen since high school, and yet I still sort of remembered it almost like a dream or something. But yeah, it's that I think it was always kind of that kind of fall in love relationship with the way that movies make you feel and the way that you can kind of live through them.
And when did you start writing about film, or did you come to that much later? Because that really is different between like watching them and then thinking about them in a kind of linear way and trying to figure out what you want to say.
Yeah, I started, it was always the dream I was going to make movies. And so,
We talked about that once.
what's that?
We talked about that
Yeah,
once.
yeah, no, it's always floating out there and always playing with things. But so I think I just from an early age wanted to be close to the movies in some way. And I was reading about the new wave, and all those guys were critics, and I don't know if there was ever like I want to write about movies or be a critic. I was just any way to I wanted to write, and I always thought of myself as a writer, and so that seemed like one way to engage films in a meaningful way. And again, books I would find or were gifted. Big high school. I think we got a big volume of Pauline Kael, and Sundays was opening up the arts and leisure section of the New York Times and kind of falling into that. And so it was always sort of there. And that was always a way, I guess, I tended to engage on a certain theoretical level, maybe to protect myself against it or something. But
So were you more of a Pauline Kael or Saris person?
Kael, just because I was exposed to Kael. I was much later that I read more Saris. Uh, that was just what was around, and so yeah.
Just a matter of what you were reading. So let's talk about this film, because it was a fascinating pick. And to be honest, I watched it when it came out, and that was like 75. I think I was in undergraduate, and I remember seeing the film, and I remember the end of the film, and I remember the beginning of the film, and then I remembered the kind of feel of it, but when I watched it again the other day, it's like I didn't remember any of the narrative at all. It was just like, and so it was like watching something new, and it was really, first of all, incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
I think the art direction in this film and the cinematography in the film are as important as anything. So, do you want to talk about like why this film, or let me put it another way, what did you remember thinking back on the film? What are the things that kind of stayed with you and thinking
Like
back?
you, almost nothing. Like and that's what I think the reason I picked it, because I think when you asked me to do this, and I think part of the context is COVID, I'm thinking about my movie habits during this time, and it's a lot of going back and trying to find things that I can't remember, and or I remember seeing and going, oh, I need to revisit that, or because and um, this movie for some reason, like, it always was like I remembered it as a good movie, but I didn't remember anything else about it. And then, like I said, I always loved Peter Weir, and I always thought his career was sort of odd too. And I'd gone back and rewatched Year of a Living Dangerously a few times.
Oh,
Truman Show is another one of those I want to go back and rewatch. I watched Master and Commander again, but those are three movies that are already sort of all over the place. And this
in
one
that kind
was,
of Kubrick way, where none of the films are really like the others.
yeah, exactly. And so that's why I don't know. I just it was on my list of that stuck with me, but not in like a real distinctive way. And rewatching it again, like you, I couldn't have told you the plot last week. But then there were scenes or moments or images that were like immediately reconjured once I saw it again. It was like, oh yeah, of course that thing. And so
Before we move away, um, uh, I haven't watched The Truman Show since that came out. What was it like watching that now, living in the world of Trump and the whole sense of how like television and reality are kind of mixing in? Did it resonate differently?
well, I haven't gotten to rewatch it yet.
Oh,
Uh, but yeah, no, I know that's the reason I want to go to it. Is it seems like it's one of those movies where it's become more of a reference. It's become such a sort of regular reference because our world has continued to sort of resemble its kind of dark metaphor. But
yeah.
yeah,
And there were other films that sort of dealt with that issue, but none that kind of touched in the way when you say that it means something. And I'm sure there are people who understand the concept of what it's about who've never seen the film.
yeah.
So, okay, so when you watch the film this time, what are the things that kind of stuck out to you?
Well, like you said, the cinematography and the just the way the narrative's constructed um, through that cinematography, and the way that um, it is so dreamlike and so passing and so ethereal and so hard to pin down and befuddling. And it's it's sort of it's a mystery, it's kind of a horror, it's an unsolved mystery, but none of that gives it really gets at what it's working with, because it's so sort of almost abstract. And I think just that the real sort of central feeling of the thing is what sort of played. And I think that's probably why it kind of was echoing in the back of my head for so many years without having any sort of real tangible memory of it.
And you think of Peter Weir's career, and this is the film that started it. And if you want to sort of make a career making movies, trying to do something that's incredibly befuddling, it's mystery, has an ending that clearly gets you pissed off. Like nobody comes to the ending and says, "Great, I'm glad I didn't find out anything."
Right.
It's like and
Yeah.
at least I knew that was coming. That was like the only thing I totally remembered.
Right. Right.
But um, to construct a film in that way and then to go on to make a series of other really good films, it's kind of an amazing thing. And it really doesn't kind of look like anything else. There isn't a film that sort of like hints at this or predicts this. It kind
Mhm.
of lives in its own genre in a sense.
Yeah, for sure. And really speaks to his um I don't his genius as a filmmaker, that he can play with he's from an early age able to deal with narrative in such a complex way and then pivot and do stuff that's very much more conventional just in terms of the storytelling. That's equally as effective on its own terms. That he isn't that kind of auteur, the Dusaris that has a style that's like, oh, this is a Tarantino film, and you're going to
Right.
get this, and it's going to have these themes, and it makes me wonder. I've been doing a bunch of not a bunch, but a little reading up on him, because he hasn't made a movie in a while, and he sort of doesn't pop up in a lot of those conversations about the great international filmmakers of the 70s and 80s, and I wonder if it's because he's harder to pin down and he's harder to sort of put in a box. He's done so many different kinds of films that it's what is a Peter Weir film? Well, it's going to be good, but it's not going to be like the last one.
Yeah, but very much like Kubrick, and I think it's probably because he just doesn't make as many films as other people do. He doesn't need to come out with a film every 2 years. He only does one when he feels like he has something he um, he wants to do. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the look of the film? And did you watch the version that was on HBO Max?
No, I did the Amazon rental.
Okay.
Is there a difference?
I'm really kind of curious about that because HBO Max has a lot of material from the Criterion Collection. And the Criterion Collection has generally new transfers.
Hmm.
What I saw looked really, really good. I mean, the colors in this are very vibrant. The whites are incredibly
Yeah.
bright, and I think that's a really kind of an important thing. And the reality is that when this was made in 1975, when you would finish a film, you would shoot it, you shoot it in film, you make a work print, and then you make a print, and then the last stage is you sit down with this person in the lab called a timer, and you and the timer sit down and say, I want that a little less red, no, a little more, no, and then they make a print, and then you look at it the next day and say, no, I want a little less of that. So every time you want to change, it costs a lot of money because you have to make a print and you don't get to see it for a little bit. So
Right.
the kind of nuance that you get in terms of color is really, it was hard to achieve. And so you have to know what you want going in a really profound way. And I mean, nowadays you just look at the software and you go, no, 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 oh yeah, oh, okay, good.
Just that.
And it's a very different thing, but it also had a kind of soft feel to it.
Hmm.
And what I was hearing was that they shot it through some wedding veil, and so that would make everything to look a little bit soft. And there are some cinematographers I know that have like 20 different pieces of cloth in different ways that they'll put in front of a lens. And some will add a little bit of color, and some will soften a lot, and some will soften a little. But ways to sort of soften the edges and give it a kind of ethereal look, which I think is kind of key to what makes this kind of look so good. And it, I mean, in many ways, it looks like a dream that just kind of continues on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has a very kind of surreal sense into it. But then it also, in terms of a narrative structures, it seems in one way like it's meandering,
Mm.
and in some ways it's very purposeful, you know. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk a
Yeah.
little
I
about
mean,
the narrative strategy?
well, the two things there. One is just that meandering bit. It's like the whole when they at first the two boys that sort of appear at the rock. It seemed like a quick little side vignette, and then suddenly the narrative falls into their lap, and we're following it through them, and that creates this kind of disjointed thing. But the color and the light and that dreamlike quality is really, to me, that was one of the more striking and moving things about it, and it really it placed it sort of out of time, and it played with all these tensions of what some of these sort of underlying themes of the film in terms of that weird kind of awkward cultural transitional moment where you have a foreign culture in a sort of raw, untouched land. You have a colonizing force that's now trying to hold on to that civilization, the sort of the the trappings of civilization, and right up on the edge of what is at least portrayed in the film as a sort of raw, sort of natural, sort of more earthly power. Um,
With
and
ants and snakes.
with the snakes, yeah, yeah. Um, and I think that that creates a kind of nostalgic kind of uh, trapped in amber kind of historic feeling to it, where you have a sense that the movie is about things fading away on a number of levels. It's a fading away of a certain attributes or attitude around culture. It's a fading away of adolescence and innocence, and there's a whole sort of sexual awakening going on. There's all sorts of levels in which it's about these sort of passings through, and so that the whole thing feels like light moving through glass or something. I think is a really incredible way of sort of visualizing that and really capturing it.
Yeah, I was thinking about so the couple that are eating lunch there with the son and the two boys
Mm-hmm.
represents kind of like these are the aristocratic, people that are coming there to eat their lunch, and and it just seemed really sort of odd to me. It's like, well, but they feel totally comfortable at home, and these are like these two old people that just come out to do that. And then you have all of these young girls, and they're like different kind of ends of a universe, people that are just like doing this thing out of ritual and habit, and these girls that are excited it's Valentine's Day, and they're just so happy to be there. And then after being happy to be there, there's half asleep and just kind of wandering around and
Right.
eating cake.
Right. Well,
And
cake in Australia at 1 in the afternoon after a slice of cake, I imagine you get pretty drowsy. But,
and there is cake a bunch, and I love the knife in the cake. That was
yeah.
a great moment that I
Mm.
totally did not remember anything about that at all. And thinking about the cinematography, so to me the most beautiful moments are the exteriors, everything that is by the rock. And when you think about photography, cinematography, you have so little control of things out in the real world
Mm.
because it rains, it's the cloudy one day, it's now cloudy the next day, and it's really hard to sort of plan to do things on a major level. Yet the look of that is just so seductive in a very kind of deep way. Not that this stuff in the school doesn't look good, but there's something, I mean, to me, the heart of the film is what happens up on the rock.
Sure.
And that's a real challenge to portray beautifully. And I think it does really well. Okay, so shall we talk about sexuality in this film?
Sure. Yeah.
What is this film really saying about young females?
Oh, I have no idea. No. I think man,
It's under everything. It's
it's
like
under
there's a
everything.
tension all
Mhm.
the way through.
Right. And there's strange, there's these strange sort of ambiguous power dynamics that are working through the various ways in which various characters are kind of interrelating. And you have the animosity towards Sarah, Sarah's infatuation, and now the names are going to escape me because I'm terrible at. But the main girl who disappears,
Yeah.
and then there's the gaze of the young men, and it's like all these things are set in motion in a way in which everything's sort of feeding on itself or something. But yeah, I mean, it's part of that open-ended mystery of disappearing, I guess. I'm not sure what to make of it yet.
And it starts in the early in the film when you're with the two girls, um, and they got those cards back and forth. There's real suggestions of a deep kind of love between them, and a deep respect between the two of them, and a
Mhm.
very, very deep kind of connection. And then you get the sense that other of the girls are somewhat jealous of their relationship,
Right.
because she's the girl who isn't supposed to be there. Parents don't have money. I mean, I think clearly all the way through, class is clearly sort of an undertone. It's not there in the foreground, but it's all the way through. I love the scene when they're driving through town. You see all the little kids chasing after them,
Hmm.
and then as soon as they're out of town, they can take their gloves off. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My fiance made an amazing observation when watching it. She said, the main character is the Laura Palmer of the world, to make a Twin Peaks reference. She's that sort of the prettiest ideal woman in the community that everybody somehow feels like they see themselves and deserve a piece of in some way. That she's almost destined to be a kind of scapegoating for everyone else's frustrated desires, or feelings of insufficiency, or conflicted sense of self, or that kind of thing. And I think it feels like it's playing in a similar Lynchian world at some points.
yeah, I mean, what did they say she was like just before she disappeared? Went up. She's the I forgot what it was. Anyway, so yeah, and then if you think about Laura Palmer, I mean she is not what she appears, right?
Mhm.
And she's the character here who wants to go exactly where they were told not to go.
Right.
We're just going to go out here. So she's everybody thinks she's the goody goody, but she's really the queen of the troublemaker.
Hmm.
So I think the analogy works really well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that driven towards some dangerous mystery in some way. Um, I don't know if you saw, the Criterion had a little interview with Peter Weir about the film.
Oh, what did he say? No, I did
He
not watch.
tells a story about going to first the person who controlled the rights was the novelist, and
Uh-huh.
she sort of held the power over who was going to make the film and how. For some reason in Australia in 1975, she was able to do that. So before he was picked to make it, she had a luncheon that he said was not unlike the luncheon in the film. Sort of this upper crust, high society in Sydney. And he goes over, and before he goes, someone who knew her says, there's one question you can ask, and that is, what happened to the girls? Because it's ambiguous in the novel, just like the
Right.
film. And so he gets to the end of the luncheon and he goes, well, how am I not supposed to ask this? Because I need to know how she thinks about that question in order to make the film correctly. So
Mhm.
he asked her, and her response is, please don't ask me that again. And he goes, well, I have one more question, and you may not answer it, but did you have an idea in your head of what could have happened to them? Did they fall in a hole? Did they get abducted by aliens? And she said, all of the above. And I think that kind of thinking about this sort of Laura Palmer-esque sort of, what is this element of the sexual undertones that's running through it? It is that, how do you capture that sort of unspoken, mysterious power that is sort of, at the center of what drives people in that way. It's like it's this sort of
And
it's falling down a hole and getting abducted by aliens all at the same time, or something like
aliens is not something I would have thought about when
that.
trying to
Yeah, I
figure
didn't.
out what happened. There are many things, but that's not necessarily one. As the film progresses, you have the setup. You have them they come there, they meet the two guys, they go up, and all of that things happen. And then when they come back, they're basically two narratives. There's the what happened to them and the search for them.
Hmm.
But then there's this other narrative that really sort of the last third seems to focus more on than what happened to the girls. And it's the issue of class. And it's the girl who who can go, he can't they kick her out. Yet and the sort of really fascinating thing is the woman who plays the headmaster. It's like she can't do the right thing that she knows she wants to do, and she feels really horrible about it and does it anyway, and then hates herself. And it's like that's like a whole separate sub movie. Or is there some way that that fits into this larger narrative that I'm just not seeing?
Well, just help me out a second, because you said that the thing that she can't bring herself to do.
She would love, I think in her heart, she feels horrible that she did it. And she feels like she has to do it. And I think after doing it, she feels really bad.
Doing what? Doing
Kicking out the kid, sending
Kicking
them
out
away,
Sarah? Yeah.
kicking out Sarah. Right. Right. And it becomes a very big part of what the film's attention is in that last third.
Yeah.
Moves away from the mystery into this, what do we do with poor Sarah? She's worried about some people won't be coming back, and but it can't be like having one more student is going to make the school bankrupt. But this is she is caught in this dilemma that she just drinks and feels horrible about, and can like do what she knows in her heart is the right thing to do. At least that's how she appears to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you touched on there's class that's sprinkled throughout it, and
All
you
the way through.
touched on the family, and even there's the two boys who kind of lead the search party. There's, they're with different classes, and that weird ambiguous connection that I didn't quite get, where he has the dream, and I haven't seen her since the orphanage, and I don't know what to make of that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how class directly plays into the whole dynamic of the disappearance, except for the fact that that entire scenario is sort of built on the back of the of two ideas, or two cultures rubbing up against each other, or of the sort of the fear of the other, and the fear of the uncontrollable, and the fear of the unknown. um, and I think there's something about time that's thread through it all as well. It's almost as if when they go out to the rock, they're already in a kind of weird timeless. They've already left civilization in a way, and therefore are exposed or vulnerable to threat and also to realization or discovery in some way. So I don't know
The
if
watch stops at noon.
what's that? Yeah, the
When they
clock.
get out there, literally time
Yeah,
stands still.
right.
It's like they don't know when to go back. I mean,
Right.
it's a real. So I think that, time and class, and then, and then there's that scene with the girl, the people who work, who get together, and, so there's that bit of class, as a, the working people and what they're doing,
Hmm.
and um, and then the teacher who is like, who was sympathetic to Sarah, and how she feels. So class, I think, floats through the whole thing. I mean, I think it's sort of part of the universe that it sort of picks on. And in a sense, people of the upper crust, like, time doesn't work in the same kind of way. I mean, time is kind of endless. And for people who work and have to punch a clock, time has a very different sense of rhythm and different kind of way to think about it.
Yeah, and also there's a sense of like the school is a realm of time, and that the headmistress sort of possesses time in a way where be back at this time, leave here, all the rules of you can't, it's sort of like they maybe there's an element of once both that when you leave that world you leave a certain conception of time and therefore a certain conception of behavior or social norms or anything, and then also um, that time in the world of the school is a form of power, is a form of um, you know cultural dominance or colonization or something. I don't know if I'm going too far with that one, but it seems that this contrast between different conceptions of or workings of time, and how that relates to personal freedom seems to be uh, at play. Um, that when you go to Hanging Rock, the girls are able to be themselves or indulge themselves, indulge their um, all of the sort of romance and flurry around the holiday and the celebration, and something that feels a bit more ritualistic and in a different sense of time in that way than the more structured school industrial time that's what you need to navigate ships. You need a watch, and it's a literal weapon of colonization.
So, yeah, I mean, that time is, yes, different depending on class. It's also interesting that all this is built around, like, St. Valentine's Day,
Mm,
and which is just really odd to me, because when you think of, you know a girls' school, it's a very different sense of what St. Valentine's Day. I mean, when I was a little kid, you would have, like, the Valentines, the boys and the girls, and you would give each other. And it's not like you, like, wanted to go out with anybody, or even, like, but there was something about the opposite sex that was the opposite sex. And here they are there, clearly aware of sensuality, in a sense, and innocence. It's like embodying both of them, but celebrating this day of love, which takes them out to it. Like, it just begins the whole journey of what this whole film sort of is about. But why St. Valentine's Day? Why do they celebrate that in that way? Or am I making too much of this?
well, one, I think there's a way of it being about romantic love and love and some of those conventions that we associate with the day. But I wonder, and this I don't know, I would want to dig into it because I don't know enough about it. But I wonder to what extent he's consciously or unconsciously playing with sort of the pagan roots of the holiday and the idea that they're
Hmm.
that beyond that this, because it feels like there's something pagan, there's something ritualistic, there's something sort of raw power of sort of intrinsic to the natural elements that's at play out in this sort of mystical hanging rock, which they describe geologically in very sexualized terms too.
Yes, yes.
So it's like this whole engagement with nature is sort of possessed of this sort of mystical power that I wonder if Valentine's Day is both nodding its head to our more kind of contemporary notions of romantic love, as well as tapping into both sort of more classical romance and also maybe even deeper into the holidays roots and sort of pagan rituals. And but again, I don't know enough about pagan Valentine's Day. I just know that there is a precedent there, I'm pretty sure, that I
Um,
don't research.
you mentioned something that is also really important, and it's the sort of natural world. So, yes, we're outside and it's really beautiful, but the thing about the ants and the snakes and the
Mhm.
the danger of the real world, and that sort of is kind of present in a lot of ways, and a little, and as a force that can't be controlled by civilization. And these girls in these beautiful white dresses this old couple are the epitome of civilized life, and yet they're in a sense untamable by the outside world that just kind of like moves around wherever they are and is not controlled by money, power, or any of the things that we tend to think of societal forms.
Yeah, I mean, and the snake, you have that overt biblical allegory working there, I guess.
Yeah.
And but you know what, so when I saw this, I was growing up in New York, rewatching it now, even though if I didn't remember it much. What struck me about it, one of the things that I loved about watching it is I think as a, being in Texas, we can understand something of some aspect of the Australian experience, and one of those things is the fact that you live in a place where you could walk down the street and get bit by a poisonous snake. I mean, and it just strikes me as one of those weird things that when you come to these sort of more perilous sort of natural ecosystems. And I was reading just randomly a few months ago a lot about um, some early Dallas settlers and reading letters and stuff, and this idea that people would come to Dallas in the 1880s, 1870s. Or I was reading about Julian Rivershaw, the famous botanist, and he was living in Dallas, and at the time it was just a frontier town. And then he'd go out with his wife on these plant collecting expeditions through the hill country, and it was that kind of thing where you literally would walk out of your carriage and there was a sense that to step beyond the confines of civilization meant that you could die that day. And I think there may be in that the way that some of those imageries of the snakes and that sort of vulnerability to the raw nature work is because it was actually literally like that, like that is how the world is when you enter um, that kind of those like the Australian outback or even the Texas, the Texas.
And thinking about that, the boy, the upper class boy, had those really long red boots.
Hmm.
So if a snake came around, he was like ready for that.
Yeah.
But the girls took off their stockings and shoes,
Right.
and
Right.
so they were just like take whatever comes their way. They were just going to take it off.
Yeah.
So what do we think about the role of the sort of the heavier woman who just decides she's going to leave and she gets to survive?
Um,
So
wait.
is there
Oh, the one who runs away.
yeah,
I thought you were talking about the teacher who was seen going up without her skirt, climbing the mountain
which
after.
is also really funny. And
Which
just
I have no. Another one. I have no idea what's going on there, but we could talk about it. Maybe something will come up.
I love that they had to like whisper it.
Yeah. Um, I mean, except that it creates one. I guess one aspect of it. I mean, that's how kids are. I mean, there's an element of there's the way that jealousies and rivalries and the ways that people understand themselves and understand their roles and who they are. Like those are different. So that she would, I feel like that was a very relatable as anyone who's, you know, been in a gaggle of adolescence trying to, you know, it's Stand by Me, you know, or
Yeah.
you know, any of these films where it's, you know, there's everyone, you know, Stranger Things. There's the kid who gets so mad, he's on the outside, who runs home. What Lucas runs home after L. Anyway, I just rewatched it. So there may be just a simple that's helped give you know, to make real that sort of dynamic in the school. And she plays in counterpoint maybe to Sarah a little bit in terms
Yeah,
of,
absolutely. Very much in counterpoint. And the fact that they let her come, I think, just sort of narratively makes it interesting to have the four of them, because it have somebody to play off of, and
right.
have her leave. And then there's the point of the girl, and again, I'm not good with names either, who returns later, who just sort of like shows up and can't remember anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, you watch that, it's like, surely you remember something, and she can't remember anything.
Right.
Why did she just show up? And it's like, but then it's like, if you ask that, you know that there's no answer to that, right?
I mean, that's what I was going to say to you. I said she showed up, so you would go, why can't she remember anything? I mean, it's that in the same way, it elevates that dreamlike quality to where you wake up in the morning and you don't understand why you were, you know, trying to run and your feet were in molasses, or like, why can't I remember the connection between these two images in a dream? It's like that sort of unspoken frustration of the inexplicable quality of it in some way. Um, yeah, I think. I mean, and also there's, now my brain and references, but I mean, there's stories like that of people coming in after trauma and being wiped of it, you know, being blocked out. And
Why don't we take some questions here? Matt, you wrote something in the chat. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, not so much a question, just more of an observation, which I think Rebecca kind of shared around Peter Weir's themes, which you were talking about earlier. You know,
Right.
not auteur, let's say, he tends to focus on stories about outsiders. So you see that in, you know, a movie like Witness, where Harrison Ford plays the cop who, you know, is hiding out with the Amish, for instance.
Good point.
yeah, and Mel Gibson's certainly an outsider in You're Moving Dangerously, and the whole master commander dynamic has that sense of like, you know, this conflict of purpose between science and I'm not what, and you know, the naval commander and the mission of progress of civilization versus knowledge. And yeah,
I don't know how it plays. I think it's Hanging Rock, if at all, but you know, it's certainly a common theme in his movies.
yeah,
You know, like with Kubrick, you can see common themes, but the genres and the way they're treated are always very different. And I think there's that kind of similarity. Um, Rebecca Rice, you had a comment. You want to talk about that? Are you there? Did she leave? I don't see her here anymore. Okay. But we have a Scott Churchill. I see you're here. Scott, do you want to ask anything or have a comment about the film?
You know, I watched it so many years ago. I really wanted to just refresh my memory by listening to your conversation, and I didn't have a chance to watch it. I have the VHS set over here.
Scott, do not watch the VHS.
No, I know that. I know that. I'm replacing all my VHSs with Blu-rays. I'm laughing that that's how long ago I watched it. So I'm just enjoying the conversation here.
Well, like I said, it's on Amazon for like $3, but also if you have HBO Max,
Yeah.
you can see and HBO Max has some very good material. I have a Roku on my TV, and HBO Max doesn't sync with that, so I literally have to take my phone and get the HBO Max phone and stream it into my
I
television.
do the same thing. I go from my Roku from my phone for YouTube. Yeah, but I can't see screeners that way. They have too many firewalls. so I use the MacBook with a wire. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was very pleased with the selection of I mean, I love Peter Weir's work, and I remember this being a very mysterious film when I saw it shortly after it came out. Actually, I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and I just remember the sexual imagery, the rock they were climbing toward, the hysteria, the Freudian subtext of it, but I can't remember the details of it, so I got to watch it again now.
It's the same way. I mean, I think that's so intriguing.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
sticks. It doesn't stick in a literal way. There's these sort of images or feelings that kind of.
Yeah, that's about all. And I wanted to see it again to see if it was still there.
Yeah.
Or was I just,
You turn it on, it's just vapor.
I know.
So Scott, how old were you when you watched it? Because I think that's also, it's like what age you're at, you respond to things slightly different.
Well, I'm trying to remember, what year did it come out actually?
75? Yeah.
What? I didn't hear.
75.
75. That's what I thought. Okay. For a moment, I thought you said 85, and then it was.
No.
No. 75. I was 25 years old.
Yeah, I was like 22 or something. Yeah. But it, and looking at that then, you're in a very different place than looking at it now. I think it's our world, our sense of experience, our sense of youth. I know it just kind of resonates differently.
Yeah.
But it still has the frustration at the end, which, it's like, going in, but it's like worth the price of admission, which is definitely something worthwhile. Other thoughts, Peter? What else do you have? Anything else you want to say about this?
Oh man, I don't know. They're just. I find it fun that there are elements of it that, I think are hard to sort of easily pick out and assign and put into place, and so much of it just adds sort of the texture to it, and just that sort of raw emotional feeling that it's wonderfully confounding, and it refuses to be pigeonholed.
I like that term, wonderfully confounding. I think that sort of typifies. So Peter, while I have you here, because you're a very sharp mind, I'd like listening to talk. What do you think is going to be going on in the film business? What do you think about movie theaters coming back, art house cinemas coming back, AMC's coming back? What do you think about how festivals are going to survive? And what is your sense of how you're thinking about this?
It's a few things. I mean, I guess with all this COVID stuff, right? It's what's your timeline, and so presuming that there's a vaccine that gets developed and we get back to some sort of willingness to be in the same room together.
On November 2nd, right?
Right, exactly. That will determine the time that takes. Will determine a lot of these things. I feel like it's this acceleration point for changes that were already happening in the industry. If I think AMC is going the way of the shopping mall, I mean, the one of the more compelling theories I've seen put out there is basically movie theaters aren't going away, but the role they play in how we see movies is going to change dramatically. I think for people who love small, thoughtful movies, that might not be the worst thing in the world, because presuming those movies can find finances to get made, I think places like the Texas Theater, maybe the Alamo to a certain extent, those types of places in which the theater is no longer, it's either a sense of community and a shared sense of a purpose-driven place, or something where you're getting more of an experience than just going to see the film that came out. One of the more interesting ideas I heard that floated is that Disney's going to come in, buy up AMC, and turn all those theaters into mini theme parks. So when the next Star Wars comes out, you are going not just to see the Star Wars, but you're going to get in some sort of, VR X-wing battle on the way in and out, or who knows what it could possibly mean. But the idea that the theater survives if it can be an experience beyond simply watching. And then I guess then there are all those experiments that we're already seeing playing out in what is the appetite, what's the value of watching a film, and what's the value of a theater, and that stuff's all going to get really tested. Like if you were, are you willing to pay $30 to see a film in your house streaming opening weekend, or go out and see it in, like, is there going to be streaming pricing based on when things come out? Pay more money to see it sooner, shorter limited release times in the theaters, and all that sort of stuff. Seems like all the rules are going to be up in the air because the distributors are just, and the theater owners are losing all of their leverage. They can't do what they tried to do early in this, which was refuse to show Universal films. I mean, they folded in a matter of months. I think what's scary is on the production side of things and the consolidation as there's less to go around, that there's going to be less appetite for risk, less money being given to people with ideas that don't fit in the box, and less freedom and things like that. What is it? The story that my kids are really into, the Avatar Last Airbender series, and they're making a live action movie of that. And it's one of these things been around, I guess, for 10-15 years, but it has this sort of cult following that people love it, and everyone's excited about the live action. And Netflix is producing it, and the creators just walked away because Netflix wanted to increase the ages of the kids in the movie and have their relationships be more explicit. And that's the type of thing that worries me, that when you only have a few Netflix style streaming services calling the shots, then those studios that were even this year, even 3 years ago, were taking chances, will start to take less chances. And
I clearly see this duality of, the high-end tentpole films and then the smaller films that play at the Alamo and the Texas Theater, and like things in the middle. It's like, where is the place for, say, the Angelica?
right.
And
Right.
will that survive? I mean, I hope it does.
But will there even be films for the Angelica? And what's crazy is, even if you think about the Netflix and Amazon and studio stuff, that's exciting, and you have a lot of what makes me concerned is that there isn't a lot of space for new voices to find an avenue in. You have voices, that compelling filmmakers who have already established themselves, being asked to do great TV shows and great projects, and but you don't have a lot of ways for emerging people to arrive, and so I wonder how that's all going to shake out as funds get more scarce, and risk tolerance gets lax, and
well,
there are fewer people calling the shots, really.
the other side of that is that it's cheaper to make a film now than ever. I mean, it's more expensive and cheaper at the same time.
Right.
There have been many films shot on an iPhone.
Right.
So things can be made. Finding ways to get them screened is going to be more and more challenging as some of the theaters are sort of struggling, and getting to those places and getting attention for those places, and also getting writing about it. It's like you have a new film that's going to open someplace, and getting somebody to write a story about it is not easy. I mean, in Dallas, Texas,
Yeah.
who's going to write about it?
Yeah. There's no. I mean, arts coverage is a whole nother topic, because there just isn't any. But then I wonder if, when you start talking about shooting stuff on iPhones and super low production values, it almost is like, well, then there's a whole nother way of thinking about what a film could be, and how you make films, and how you fund films, and who your audience is, that that doesn't have to be the, oh, you made this movie and now well, I'm obsessed right now with this Irish documentary filmmaker who does a lot of Irish music films. I won't get lost in my obsessive rabbit hole about it, but he's made these films. Some of the stuff is funded a little bit through grants and foundations, and then it's just like putting it online with a Patreon account and getting enough people to be in love with your work that you can do it. And that's there's a lot of podcast people out there doing similar things, and I don't know how long-term sustainable it is, but when you start thinking of filmmaking more like music making, when it's more like, okay, I have a film, I'm going to go gig it, I'm going to go on tour and try to piece this thing together and put the hustle in. It's a different model, but when it comes to the having access to being able to make movies and show them, I think maybe that changes, and maybe the theater stuff changes too. Maybe we start looking at we've already gotten used to watching things and engaging with each other in new spaces and new ways of thinking about how to bring people together. So maybe some of these things evolve into new expectations, and in that way I think festivals play a role because they've been doing this type of thing. I mean, doing screenings at bars or screenings, filling a theater with people who know nothing about the film but just want to be there because there's a different ancillary mission that people trust. And I think all of those things still have their currency. I think the people who have to be afraid right now are especially your sort of your that level of sort of artsy independent film studio type things that fill up the Oscars every year. It's like
The Sundance kind of.
Yeah, in your so all those
high-end Sundance.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows answers, but
So Peter, let me ask you one last question because we're coming up to 8:30 unless anybody else has any other questions. Do you have, how many virtual cinema films have you purchased in the last 6 months?
And what do you mean by virtual cinema?
Oh, so so like Texas Theater has those films you can pay like $5 or $12, or I think they're mostly $12 now.
Yeah.
Which was it was a way for both the theater and the filmmaker and the distributor to stay in business.
Yeah.
But I just don't think many people bothered to see any of those films.
When they started it, I got real excited, and I put Carol says 0. I have to say 0 too, and I feel really bad saying that because when it started, I was like, "Oh, this is great! This is a great way." And I looked at what was playing that particular weekend at the Texas Theater, and was like, "Oh, I wanted some Polish film was coming out. I think I was like, oh, that sounds amazing. I need to get this," and then I forgot about it, and it was gone the next week. And it's hard to get. How do you get buzz and momentum, and how do you? So it's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm with you. I don't think as many people are watching those as one might think.
Yeah, it's a shame because Adam says, I rented a few, but mostly in the first month. Then it kind of fell on the wayside. It was a good idea to keep everybody moving. But, the problem was, of course, all these people that had films that were supposed to come out in March, April, May, and were supposed to show at South by Southwest and other festivals. Right. And they're like, what do? We want to get the films out there. And so now people are starting to come back. The Angelica is open. The Studio Movie Grills are open. Some of the Alamos are now open. I'm a little. I'm not going yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also staying home and not teaching at school. I'm doing all my teaching online. I am a little, I'm in the target demographic to die. I'm going to try and stay alive here. But, the question really is it worth possibly getting sick to see Tenet?
Right.
That's what I've been asking myself. all week.
I just don't think any film is worth getting sick over. And, you know, I would love to have our documentary festival in a real theater. I really, really would. You don't know how much I miss it and want it there and so desperately do. But I just, it's just not safe. And, you know, I want to be here for next year and the year after and want to try to keep doing things.
Well, we live in two worlds, and we're living in the universe of it's not safe, and there are other people living in a universe where it is safe. And as long as there's that division, it's gonna keep going like it's going.
So Carol says Panavision is seeing limited return to production in the U.S. More globally with deliberate COVID restrictions. Well, clearly, in places that have a real president and real government, they actually have policies and they're doing much better than we are. But what's really interesting is, as a kind of dichotomy, is that commercials are rolling. You know, Nori Niven has been shooting a lot, and you know, with a commercial, you can hire one person whose job it is to make sure that everybody is 6 feet away, everybody's got their mask on, and you can do that. But if you're in a small crew, like, you're doing too much, and it's just too dangerous. So there's a real so the bigger things can happen. The tentpole movies can hire enough people to make
Right.
people safe. It's the smaller movies that are much more dangerous. But as we were talking about before we started, you know, like Danielle Giorgio,
Just gonna say, yeah.
she had all of her dancers and actors quarantined for a month before production, and she took all the considerations to make it happen. So it's doable. It's just harder. So Peter, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and it's just so great to hang out with you. It's like I haven't seen you and sat down and had coffee with you for a long time. And in a sense, these cinematic conversations are sitting down talking about films with friends, and I think it's a really cool thing.
Well,
And
thanks for asking me to do it. It's been fun.
well, I think that's great. And Scott, whenever you're ready, we can have you. So
Sure.
if you got something you want to do for next week, you can be it.
Well, let me mull it over. I'll write you back. I'm wondering what Marshall McLuhan would make of all of this. The switch from the big theater experience to the home screen. You know, that would be another interesting angle on it.
So okay. So Scott, have you ever seen the film that I did about Marshall McLuhan?
No, I wish I had.
It's called Rewinding into the Future, which is such a McLuhan-esque thing.
Yeah.
So I did this back in a long time in the festival. I wanted to do a program and I couldn't make it happen live. So I made this documentary. I'll be happy to send it to you. It's online. So the thing about McLuhan is, I mean, you're talking about the hot and cold media, right? And so there used to be a differentiation between cinema on a large screen
Yep.
and television, which was low res. And the basic part of the McLuhan theory is that low res material, you bring yourself to it and you fill in the resolution, right? And stuff that's high res doesn't involve you as emotionally because you don't have to bring yourself into it. I don't know that I 100% believe that. By the way, the example in the film that I did here was a friend of mine in Austin was telling the difference in hot and cold media, and she says, phone sex is cold media because it's not about the resolution, it's about what you imagine to it. So that's the way you can always remember the difference between hot and cold media.
It's about how much concentration you have to do to stay focused. So I think it may have something to do with the high res, low res. But for example, in a theater, when those lights go out, like I'm doing an eco cinema class at the University of Dallas now. I've got 8 students only, 2 online. Usually I get 50 students in a film class, but I got 8 students, 2 are online, but we have great social distancing. No one on campus has the virus. And when I put Koyaanisqatsi on the screen in our screening room, that's very different for the students who are seeing it in there with the Philip Glass soundtrack completely immersing them.
Yeah.
than when they watch it at home on a iPad or a MacBook or something.
Yeah, that's the David Lynch thing about watching. What did he talk about? The thing in the desert with the match. Lawrence of Arabia. You shouldn't watch Lawrence of Arabia on an iPhone. And he
Right.
has like some other really good quotes about that. So in the McLuhan sense, it really is because he specifically talks about resolution, and,
Yes.
and that is a fallacy now because our TVs are as high resolution as the films are in a theater. Now,
That's right. You can either look, but when I'm in my home entertainment center,
yeah,
I can be looking at I only have a 55-inch TV, but I'm sitting close enough to it. But I can also turn my head to the right and left. The kitchen's just over there. I've
right.
got my book sitting here and the light is on. It's very different from when I'm sitting silent in the theater and
Right.
I'm not able to rewind. I can't say, oh, I want to see that little thing again. When
Yes.
you're giving yourself over to the flow of the film and all you see in your entire visual field is that light and you're on the other side of the screen. I don't find myself on the other side of my Sony screen
No,
very often.
I totally get that. I mean, I do try when I'm watching television to, and there's a real difference culturally. So there's the things I watch in my office here, and the things I watch in the room with the television. When I'm watching in the room with the television, I am focused on the television. That's what I do. I mean, that's like my job. It's what and I won't pick up the phone. I won't look at email. I will keep my focus on that. When I'm here in my office, it's a bit different because all the distractions of the universe are in front of me. So it's really a matter of defocusing, and we're in a world where we're all multitasking all the time, and it's really hard. And going into that darkened space is the place where you take all of that and it goes away, and you are sort of forced into not using your phone and experiencing. So the small moments take a different sense of relevance. They resonate deeper. You feel them deeper. You experience them deeper. So it's not the resolution, and it's not the medium. We talk about the medium as the message. It's not the medium. It's where you're sitting and
That's
how
right.
you're sort of placing yourself in that environment. You can watch. I mean, you can watch an iPad, and if you turn out all your lights and turn off your internet and just watch that, you can have a pretty good experience.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, the reality is you probably don't, because your wife will call and say that dinner's ready or something, which it is. So guys, this was really great. Scott, I look forward to chatting with you more. We'll let you know what we're doing next week. Peter, so good to see you. Would love to, we can have coffee someplace outside at like Ascension or Davis Street sometime.
Are those places open? Well, I know Davis Street is because I saw an image of crammed cafe tables and no masks. So.
And Ascension, you can sit outside. So that would be good to do. Guys,
Cool.
thank you very much for joining us and looking back to that classic from 1975, remembering what we saw and thinking of it differently. It was a great experience. And Peter, thank you for pushing me to rewatch this, because I would not have rewatched this had you not suggested it. And it's one of the joys of what this whole thing is about. So guys, thank you all. We'll see you next week. By the way, if any of you want to know the Norm documentary I did for KERA for Frame of Mind last year will be airing Thursday night at 10:30 on KERA. So if you want to know the history of Dallas sports as told through Norm Hitzges, it will not be aired very often, and this is one of those rare opportunities you get to see it. And the series, the Frame of Mind series for this year, starts in 2 weeks. And the first thing we're going to see in the series is this film made in 1961 by the Dallas Citizens Council called Dallas at the Crossroads. And that's where we begin.
It's going to confuse a lot of channel surfers.
What's that?
It's going to confuse a lot of people switching through the channels looking for something to.
Yeah.
They're going to think it's an official memorandum from our mayor.
Great piece on the mayor there. What kind of feedback did you get on that?
Oh, everything you can imagine.
Did the mayor respond?
Not directly. Not directly.
Let me ask you one more thing before we leave. I'm just curious. How well did you know Wick?
Oh, we have another hour. Yeah, I knew Wick very well, very well. I mean, I'd worked at D for 10 years, and then before that at the newspapers for another 3. So I've known him for, yeah, almost 20 years.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's a blow. It's a real blow. But
Well, we'll talk about that when we get together.
yeah, sounds
All right.
good. All
Very
right,
good.
take care.
Thank you so much, all. We'll
Good
see
to
you
see you
next
guys.
time.